Thank you and good morning. I'm Malcolm Sims. I'm Director of MPA Asphalt and of the AIA. Firstly, thanks to Tarmac for the invitation to share the findings of this year's alarm survey and our thoughts on how to improve local road infrastructure. In case you're unfamiliar with the AIA and what we do, we're a partnership between the Mineral Products Association and Eurobitume UK. These are the trade associations for aggregates and asphalt producing companies and the oil companies who produce bitumen in the UK. We aim to promote the uses and benefits of asphalt to specifiers, decision makers, and the general public. Many of you may already be familiar with ALARM. That's the annual Local Authority Road Maintenance Survey, but it's not the only thing we do to keep local roads in the spotlight. For a number of years now, we have co-supported the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Highways, soon to be reformed and renamed as the APPG for Better Roads, which helps to maintain dialogue on local road-related issues with parliamentarians and policymakers. We also produce a free magazine twice a year, Asphalt Now. The latest edition has just been published, and we hold an annual sharing best practice event, now online obviously, for local authority highway engineers. The AIA also hosts Roadfile. That's www.roadusers.org.uk. This is an online hub for road-related statistics from a range of UK and European, mostly governmental sources. I'd certainly recommend a look at it, as it provides some very pertinent context for the current condition of our roads. For example, data shows the faster rates of growth in traffic volumes on local roads in the UK than on the strategic road network over the last decade. Yet it's been the SRN that has benefited from inflation-busting increases in funding. Local roads make up somewhere 97–98% of the overall highway network in England and Wales, and are probably each local authority's biggest single asset. Yet, despite an asset value of around £400 billion, as Alarm 21 shows us, local roads remain the poor relation, and maintenance expenditure still represents less than 1% of their value, let alone their replacement cost. Now, as a body that represents material suppliers, you might think that we have a vested interest in reporting bad news. Well, you would say that, wouldn't you, scenario? So I need to emphasise that the Alarm survey reports the findings from those working at the sharp end. The figures and the feedback come directly from those who are responsible for maintaining local roads, and the report combines both quantitative and qualitative data, which is independently verified. Now, it goes without saying that the last 12 months or so have been like no other, and those responsible for maintaining our local roads should be proud of delivering seamless operations despite the disruptions caused by the pandemic. They have been recognised as hidden heroes by the Roads Minister, Baroness Veer, and rightly so, for working tirelessly, keeping our key workers and emergency services moving, supermarket shelves stocked, more recently vaccines distributed. So we're extremely grateful that in these unusual and difficult times, so many authorities, highways teams find the time to complete this year's alarm survey. Response rates were even up in some areas. These contributions allow us to continue to report robust data, track long-term trends, as well as highlight annual funding and condition levels. For example, here's just a snippet of the coverage our media campaign secured on launch day on the 31st of March, which included coverage in national newspapers, over 25 regional radio and TV stations, racking up an audience of more than 10 million, and if you extend this on social media, an audience reach of over 1 billion people. But enough about the background. What does the alarm report actually tell us? This year, respondents told us that highway budgets were up, some good news, up 15% on last year. This much needed uplift has been in part due to additional funding awarded by central government, including the Pothole Fund, as well as additional pots to support changes due to COVID-19 guidance and to advance the government's active travel ambitions, such as walking and cycling. However, funding was actually less than we reported 2 years ago, demonstrating that the cuts reported then have not been replenished and the long-term inconsistent pattern of funding continues. This up-down, in-out approach to funding local roads means highway engineers continue to have to make tough choices to keep roads safe, with the result that delivering long-term, cost-effective and sustainable maintenance improvements remains out of reach. Alarm data shows that if authorities had sufficient funds to meet even their target conditions, there would be an additional 14,400 miles of local roads in a good state of repair and over 2,000 fewer miles in urgent need of repair. But how do we get to those figures? So the chart on the left here shows the annual total highway maintenance budgets reported since 2012. And we can see that there's been a repeat pattern of short-term cash injections followed by years of underfunding. Meanwhile, the weight and volume of traffic continues to rise and the network continues to age. This chart refers to the total budget, which includes other significant areas of expenditure, bridges, street lighting, grass cutting, signals and signs, all of those things. It's not surprising then, as we can see from the chart on the right, which, although it mirrors the same pattern, focuses specifically on the carriageway maintenance budget. And despite the increase in budget, there is still a reported average shortfall of £4.5 million per authority for this element. This is the gap between what they've received and what they tell us they need to keep the carriageway in reasonable order. This average shortfall, that's the pale blue sections on the chart, is the same as was reported back in 2012. This underscores the point that over the last decade, local roads have not received sustained investment. The pattern is one of stop and start, with budgets continually falling short of what's needed. For last year alone, this totals to £752.6 million across the country. Local authorities are encouraged to meet their statutory duty to maintain the highway using asset management principles. So this on-again, off-again approach to funding, which still falls short of the amount needed, just doesn't make sense. Perversely, it almost enforces a short-term patch and mend approach. If that's all you can afford to do, then that will be all that you actually do. This is reflected in other data and alarm, which I don't have time to run through, but we can, for example, see increases in the amount of reactive maintenance being carried out. Again, not surprisingly, the ongoing hokey-cokey pattern to funding continues to have a detrimental impact on road conditions, with Alarm 21 reporting little sign of improvement despite the increases. The legacy of inconsistent funding means that highway engineers are running to stand still, prevented by insufficient budgets from being able to plan ahead proactively so that maintaining local roads to target conditions remains out of reach. So what does it mean for conditions, as if they weren't self-evident? Since 2018, Alarm has collected Road Condition Index, RCI, data. This is an output from Scanner and other surveys, and is also how authorities report conditions to DFT, for example. In simplistic terms, it's like a scorecard for the network, with the RCI index featuring 3 condition categories: green for good, amber where some deterioration is apparent, which should be investigated, and red for poor overall condition, likely to require planned maintenance within a year or so. These scores are then applied across 3 classes: principal, classified and unclassified roads, and from the data we can compare current road conditions against those targets. Again, this year's alarm findings show that the reduction in RCI target reported over the last 2 years has, however, faltered. But although increased budgets reported this year may have led to the prospect of achieving more ambitious targets, the simple reality is the targets have not been met. We tried to illustrate that with these donut charts. Now, with apologies for the amount of data on this slide, it's still possible to spot some trends. Overall, the percentage of the network of all road types categorized as green has fallen compared with last year's data, such that there are now around 2% or 4,000 fewer miles in a good state of repair. When it comes to the percentage of the network classified as red, there's really no change on last year, with 9% of the network, or 18,500 miles of roads, still classified as in poor overall condition. The number of roads classified as amber, so that's the difference between the red and green, continues on an upward trajectory. More than 64,000 miles, or almost a third of the network, is now classified in this category. And unsurprisingly, this has increased by the 4,000 miles, which is the equivalent decrease in those in the green category. However, many respondents to Alarm comment on the rising wave of amber. And since we started collecting RCI, we've seen the percentage of the network classed here increase by 5% over 10,000 miles of the local road network. And if we had a more detailed spectrum of colours, the suggestion is that there's more of the network trending toward dark amber, nearly red. There are, of course, regional variances, but the overall picture is still pretty gloomy. Across England, London and Wales, over 18,500 miles of the network now falls into a red classification. In addition to comparing actual road conditions against target, for the first time this year, we also asked authorities what their ideal RCI profile would look like if they had sufficient funds. On the assumption that even with asset management approaches, this means that not all of the network will be in perfect condition all of the time. And authorities told us that the profile of the network should be something like 71% green, 23% amber, and 6% red. These are shown in the far right donuts here. And clearly, no category of road currently achieves these aspirational ideal levels. Based on the feedback we received, we've calculated that if local authorities had the funds to maintain the network to ideal standards, we would have more than 22,500 more miles of roads marked as green. Even the nearly 14,500 miles to meet current targets would, I'm sure, be welcomed by the travelling public. One of the findings from this year's survey that captured media interest has been the startling figures for road surfacing frequency. As we know, replacing the surface layer of roads at regular intervals maintains an appropriate level of grip for safety and guards against water ingress and freeze-thaw effects by maintaining a weatherproof seal on the surface. The recommended frequency of road resurfacing is between 10 and 20 years, an ideal, as the reported figures show, which is only achieved on principal roads in London. Overall, across all types of road, the average road resurfacing frequency reported in this year's survey is once in every 68 years. So perhaps if you see the road outside your house being resurfaced, take a picture. You might not see it again in your lifetime. Now, the discrepancy between the reported resurfacing frequency for principal roads and the rest of the network in all regions continues to highlight how local authorities have to prioritise key routes, as current budgets simply are not sufficient to maintain the whole of the network adequately. And so to potholes, which the media loves to use to highlight the alarm report. After the drop in the total number of potholes filled in last year's report, this figure has jumped again to 1.7 million, the equivalent of one pothole being filled every 19 seconds in England and Wales. But as highway engineers have told us, filling or fixing potholes is actually a failure. Potholes and the repairs are a symptom of an underfunded network where tough decisions have to be made to keep them all functioning. Previous research carried out by ourselves has indicated that planned preventative maintenance is 20 times more cost effective per square metre than reactive work, such as patching and filling. Even the Treasury recognises this and has said that the extra money allocated in England to the Pothole Fund, that's £500 million a year from last year until 2024-25, will, quote, fix up to 50 million potholes, but will also be available for authorities to undertake longer-term road resurfacing works to prevent potholes forming in the first place. So you don't actually have to use pothole fund cash to throw into potholes, and it's still cheaper to do it in a planned way than reacting in emergency situations. The continued high numbers of potholes filled does not provide value for money or improve the underlying structure and resilience of our local road network. So, in drawing to a close and considering the combined effects of all the previous stats, overall, local authorities told us this year it would now take 10 years and cost over £10 billion to bring the network up to a position from which it could be maintained cost effectively going forward. But this, of course, doesn't account for unforeseen circumstances, such as more extreme weather events as a result of climate change, nor does it factor in the ongoing deterioration that would still take place while the work was being carried out. While the increased budgets have reduced the cost to catch up in most places, it's still an eye-watering amount to try to find, or even lobby to try to find. That's why what the AIA is calling for is a longer-term approach to local road funding. We certainly don't expect to see £10 billion arrive overnight, but the first step towards a more sustainable road network has to be sustained funding. As stated here by our chair, Rick Green, what's needed is a 5-year commitment, similar to the one already made to the SRN in the roads investment strategy periods. This would allow local authority highway engineers to plan ahead and more effectively implement a more proactive, whole-life asset management approach to maintaining the network. We appreciate that right now there are new and unprecedented challenges that will need to be addressed in the short term. But looking ahead, a well-funded, well-maintained network will be key to supporting recovery and regrowth and underpin active travel and levelling up goals. So on that note, thank you for the time and back to your hosts.